As Dot mentioned, the title of the talk is Triggers to Free Will, and what I'm going to talk to you about are 5 triggers to free will, and I think these can be applied in retail settings for the most part, and in fact the studies that I'm going to show you were for the most part done in actual food retail settings, fast food restaurants and cafeterias. I put this slide up because well, first of all, Daniel Kahneman was my postdoctoral advisor, and I'm going to follow his conceptualization for how to think about free will, and it's certainly a gross simplification, but it's one that we've been using throughout most of the morning. Some of you may have read his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 as a psychologist, but for essentially informing the discipline of economics as to the systematic irrationalities of consumer behavior. Irrationalities that economists like David just now acknowledge and build their work around. So we now have this field, behavioral economics, where you have economists like David and psychologists like myself doing work that's very similar. That's not to say we agree about everything. So the two systems, as Kahneman describes them, are the fast automatic system that makes most of our decisions. This is a hot system, and that's the system that makes it very difficult for us to choose the apple over the cake, at least for most of us, and very easy to choose the cake. We're just incredibly drawn to it. In contrast, we do also have this slow and reflective system, and the suggestion is that here is where free will, self-control, these kinds of notions reside. This is the cool system, and it's perhaps best epitomized by Mr. Spock, the Doctor of Cool from Star Trek. The triggers that I'm going to talk to you about, I think, do provide a cooling effect on hot cognitive processes. Now, if you take a cold bucket of water and splash it on a consumer when they're about to order fast food, that would certainly have a cooling effect, but that's probably going to lead to a little bit more reactance than McDonald's would typically be open to. So I hope that when you see these interventions that I'm describing, you will see it as somewhat weaker than splashing a bucket of cold water on a consumer. I thought that was a funny joke, but maybe it wasn't. Okay, thank you. So again, I'm tying all these things together: free will, the slow cognitive system, self-control, and the hope is that all of these things lead to some kind of long-term thinking, at least the benefits that come from long-term thinking, benefits that are sometime down the road. And the suggestion is that that system can be triggered. Let me first suggest that, it's not implausible to think that free will can be triggered because we don't have it equally at all times. This is a study that I recently finished with my colleagues at Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania, Heng-Chen Dai and Katie Milkman, coming out in a journal called Management Science, A Fresh Start Effect, Temporal Landmarks Motivate Aspirational Behavior. We show that free will seems to be more active at different times through the year. The first study, we looked at Google search activity, and Google makes some of this data available. So we looked at when people search for the word diet. Perhaps not surprising that the first of the year is the most common time when people search for the word diet. This is when we make the New Year's resolutions that we go on to ignore. But it's useful to see that Mondays, the first of the month, after federal holidays, these are other temporal landmarks that can be associated with fresh starts, and we see significantly increased search for terms like diet on these days. And it's a lot lower than on the first of the year, but remember there are 52 Mondays in each year, so that's a lot of opportunities to get this 15% bump. We also got data from a company called Stick.com. They run a website that allows you to make commitments to goals like exercise more, lose weight, sleep better, spend more time with the family. And they call these commitment contracts. They're commitment contracts because you sign up to do something, and usually you put some money on the line. You say, I will donate $100 to charity if I don't manage to do this. Or an even stronger version is to give $100 to a charity or a cause that you don't like. If you're a Republican, you might sign up to give $100 to the National Democratic Congress. And you get a friend or a colleague to referee and observe, and they're going to enforce the contract if you don't actually manage to do it. So what we're looking at here is what times of year, what days do people decide to do these commitment contracts. So again, no surprise, huge bump on New Year's Day, but again, also a huge bump on Mondays. And the numbers on the y-axis there are percentage increases relative to a baseline day. And we see the same pattern. One more pattern here for you. This is gym attendance at the campus gym at the University of Pennsylvania. We see many of the similar bumps, less of a first of the year bump because for the most part the students aren't back yet, but a huge Monday bump, a huge semester bump, school breaks. We had individual data on this one, so here we even see an increase around birthdays. There was one exception to this, unfortunately, the 21st birthday. Those of you who aren't based in the US may not know that's the legal drinking age in the US. So there seems to be no free will on the 21st birthday, or maybe it's free will being used for other things. So as I mentioned, the overarching question here is how can free will be triggered? And the traditional policy tools that are thought to trigger free will are prices, changes in prices, you either add taxes or subsidies, make healthier stuff more appealing. And there's some evidence that those work, perhaps by triggering self-control, but as David and others noted, calorie labels, raw information, doesn't seem to do that. We haven't had much of an effect. I haven't seen much of an effect of calorie labeling in the jurisdictions where it's happened. So this has turned behavioral economists to the concept of a nudge. And here I want to distinguish between a weak nudge and a strong nudge. A weak nudge is one where you're bypassing self-control or bypassing free will. You're putting a different default in front of the consumer, or you're making healthier stuff more salient so it's easier for them to see it. They're not necessarily making a decision here. They're just sort of going with what's in front of them. So I call that avoiding free will. But I think we have lots of tools where we can trigger free will, and these are what I call a strong nudge. And I describe them very specifically as being directive, but not too directive. And again, not too directive would be throwing the bucket of water on a person. I don't think any of these are equivalent to that. These are the 5 I'm going to talk about. Inviting consumers to downsize their meal portions, showing them traffic light labels in the actual retail environment, offering them feedback as to how they're doing compared to others. And Susanna described a study that did that as well. Providing small incentives to eat better, and then something that a colleague of mine has called temptation bundling. I'll show you a neat example of that. There are some risks, reactants perhaps being the most notable one. People may walk out of the establishment, or they may just say, to heck with this, I don't want to hear talk about vegetables, and maybe go on to eat more ice cream than they actually would. We saw no evidence of that in the studies here, but it has to be acknowledged as a potential risk. So there are the 5 triggers. Again, I'm going to suggest that they're going to work best when the language is not too strong, when consumers do actually want to eat better. And I think that describes the vast majority of adults, at least. But this isn't going to help us with perhaps the most vulnerable population, those who really have other priorities on their mind. The hope is that this sort of approach can change the culture in a variety of ways. And note that they all still preserve choice, so people can still get all the foods that they love, and you can continue to sell all of the foods that you make. So here's the downsizing study. It's done with my colleagues Janet Schwartz, Brian Ebel, and Dan Ariely. We had access, cooperation from a Panda Express restaurant in North Carolina. We motivated this with a pilot survey where we asked some online respondents, how big are the portions at the restaurants you typically visit? Nobody says that they're too small, but over a third say that they're usually too large. Not just sometimes too large, but usually too large. So there is an acknowledged problem here among at least a large subset of consumers. We went on to ask them, so these portions are too large. Do you ever specifically request a smaller portion than is offered on the menu? And the answer is almost never in most cases. 11% of people say they do it often or most of the time, but that's a lot lower than the 37% who say portions are usually too large. So then we asked if the restaurants you go to started offering optional downsized portions at a very small discount, how often would you accept? And now we see a vast majority saying often or most of the time. Do they really do this when these are offered? That was the point of the field study at the Panda Express. So we didn't think they would spontaneously request smaller portions. The survey suggested that that wasn't happening. We wanted to verify that. But then we wanted to see if they would accept this strong nudge, in a real setting when it was offered. And the version of that question here is, can free will be triggered? Can you trigger free will thinking about the long term by giving people a reminder at the exact moment when they're about to make a decision? Do they know that they want to use a little bit of free will? And our suggestion is yes, and I think the findings are consistent with that. Here's how it works when you order a meal at Panda Express. You first order a meal size, and most people are ordering a full meal. It either has one entree or two. But it always comes with one of these side dishes: fried rice, steamed rice, chow mein, all of which are very high in calories, and mixed vegetables, which is low in calories, but only about 3% of consumers order it. In addition to your side dish, you get either one of these two entrees, which are versions of stir fries. All of them very delicious, orange chicken being their most popular item. And then you would pay, and at the cash register, we had a research assistant station, and the research assistant was collecting receipts so that we could actually track the orders that way. This is stuff that's actually going through the cash register. So here is how this nudge or trigger worked. People ordered the meal. They first specify the side dish. Those are the 3 high-calorie ones, and those are the ones that almost everybody orders. So when someone orders one of those, the clerk was trained to say, would you like to cut more than 200 calories from your meal by taking half portion of your side dish? It may sound like an exaggeration, but it's not. Those side dishes all have over 400 calories in them. It's a huge portion. We thought this is a place where people might be willing to make a small compromise if we prompt them at just the right time. They do that. They either get half portion or a full portion, and then they go ahead and order their entrees, and then they pay. That's what the line looks like when it's empty. Here is somebody ordering, and the clerk is about to say to them, would you like a half portion? That's what a full portion looks like. That's about a 1,500 calorie meal. That's higher than average at the restaurant. They're usually about 1,000 calories, but you can get 1,500 calories worth of food for about $7 pretty easily at Panda Express. So here was the design. 2 days, it was baseline, just collecting data as usual, no intervention. Then 2 days of this nudge where the clerk was saying, would you like a half portion? The next week, back to 2 baseline days. And then we did a slight variation of the nudge on these last 2 days. Here, rather than saying, would you like to cut more than 200 calories, the clerk added a clause, would you like to cut 200 calories and save 25 cents by taking a half portion on your side dish? And of course, the restaurant agreed to this. Very modest discount. We thought that might make a small difference. In the end, it didn't. So here are the results. These are the proportion of people taking half-sized side dishes. Basically, nobody spontaneously asking for it. That's consistent with our preliminary survey. But a full third of customers actually said yes, even when there was no discount. Would you like to take 1 scoop of rice instead of 2? More women than men, but still a large subgroup. Again, basically nobody taking it the following 2 days spontaneously without being asked. And with a 25-cent discount, no difference. Still about a third of customers saying, yeah, sure, that sounds good. I'll take the smaller portion. Here's what it translates into what they eat. Of course, they do save 200 calories on the side dish as promised. And they don't really eat more on the entrees. We might expect them to react negatively and then sort of load up on the entree portion, but we didn't see that happening. That difference there is not significant, the 538 versus 505, even if it was certainly much smaller than 200 calories. Here's another way to cut it, not just looking at the people who accepted versus rejected, but the people who were even in the store on the nudge days versus the baseline days, comparing across all of them. We see that we do save almost 100 calories on the side dish per order across all orders, whether accepting the nudge or not. And again, it's not made up for in calories in the entree. Did they go and order ice cream that evening or that afternoon? We don't know. If any of you wants to sponsor a much more expensive study where we track that, we'll be happy to give it a shot. but this is the best we were able to do here. So there's some promise here in a direct invitation to downsize, the opposite of what McDonald's used to do and has many years ago given up on doing, which was asking people to supersize. Many customers are prepared to take a smaller portion if we get them at the right time. So here's the next trigger I want to talk about, traffic light labels. These are much more direct than calorie labels. They're actually making clear what is less healthy and what is more healthy. We think it still stops somewhere short of throwing a cold bucket of water on your meal. Here's what the labels look like. This is done at a large hospital cafeteria, and we had some messaging that went with it. The reds, it never said, don't be crazy, don't eat this stuff, it'll make you fat. We just said there's a better choice in green or yellow. So we have 3 studies that have come out of this now, a couple in American Journal of Preventive Medicine, one American Journal of Preventive Health. And this is my colleagues at Mass General Hospital, large teaching hospital in Boston, where we did this. Ann Thorndike was the lead. She's an internist there. Lillian Sonnenberg was the nutritionist. Susan Barraclough, an important collaborator, was the cafeteria manager, who is also a dietitian, and Doug Levy, the statistician. Huge cafeteria, 6,000 visitors through there a day, about 30,000 in revenue. We have 2 years of cash register data now. I'm first going to show you what happened in the first 6 months, where we have a baseline period versus the labeling. Again, there's what the labels look like. Red items were generally those that were very high in calorie or high in saturated fat. This was developed in 2008 when the old food guidelines were still in place. Importantly, though, I want to claim that this is not really an informational campaign. This is a trigger. This has something to do with notions of self-control and free will. The way I suggest that it works doesn't necessarily work the first time, but over time, as people find themselves ordering red items over and over again, at some point they say, why am I doing this? And they start to exert some self-control. A little bit of evidence that this is what's going on. I'll show you that in a little bit. So here was a design 3 months starting December 1st of 2009 where we were tracking all the register, we got all the register data over that period. Labels were not up. They went up on March 1st over a weekend, and then we're going to measure the next 3 months. As I mentioned, we have now 2 years of data, and I'll show you what that looks like. But here's the very first pass, just before labels and after labels, and here's what we see. We haven't moved mountains here, but red product consumption has come down by about 10% in that second 3-month period after the labels. And that's a meaningful change in a retail setting. Fortunately, it was offset by an increase in green consumption. So revenue at the cafeteria was flat. The difference is somewhat more pronounced in the beverage category, about a 15% decrease in red beverages made up entirely in the green beverage category. So that's pretty encouraging. Now, when I say it's a trigger, not just new information, here's one piece of evidence that that's the case. It was not surprising to hear, here are 2 red products, as in ones that we encourage people, we said there's a better choice. An unsurprising red is Coca-Cola. Surprising red might be Nantucket Nectars. Folks here probably know that it's very high in calories, but lay people tend to think that that's a very healthy beverage. I put this up here with apologies to Coke, but maybe I should apologize to Pepsi, which would also have been in the red category. Or maybe I shouldn't apologize to either of you, because the diet beverages were in fact green, as of course were your lovely water products. So this online panel suggested that nobody thinks of these Nantucket Nectars as red, so I call those surprising reds. If this was just an information thing, you would expect that when people see red labels on this, they would say, wow, I better not be drinking that stuff. And if there was some sort of surprise at Coca-Cola being considered a red beverage, or if there was a lack of surprise, we wouldn't have expected much change. And indeed, there is no surprise here. Everybody thought that Coke would be labeled red, even Coke drinkers. It's so delicious, we drink it anyway. But this is actually the pattern that we saw. The surprising reds, like Nantucket Nectars, showed basically no change from baseline to labeling, whereas the sugared sodas, were not surprisingly red, showed a large and significant change after the labeling went up, which is why I suggest that there's a triggering element here. People are saying, oh, I'm drinking this red thing all the time, maybe I should switch. And the good news for Coke and Pepsi is by and large they switch to your water products or diet sodas. Here are the trends over 2 years. We did have a few additional interventions where we made healthier items a little bit easier to find, but across that over 2 years, these differences were sustained. 24% red consumption at the beginning down to 21%, about 15% change. That's meaningful and a commensurate increase on the greens, and the change is even bigger in the beverage category over 2 years. It's largely been maintained. Quickly show you this next study, feedback and incentives. We ended up lumping these two things together. This is still at Mass General Hospital cafeteria. Most of the people going through there, about half of them are employees, and for many of them we can track their purchases over time because they pay with a swipe card. So we know a little bit about them, including their address, and we were able to send them letters to give them feedback and say things like, you know, you purchased 30% fewer green items than the healthiest hospital cafeteria eaters last month. We're also able to offer some of them an incentive to earn a $10 reward, just to increase your green consumption a little bit. That's the card. Here's how the randomization worked. We had 2,600 of them. 877 were randomized to feedback only. They got monthly letters telling them how many green purchases that they had made, again, relative to others. Some people were randomized to feedback plus this modest incentive, and then of course we had a control group who had no contact at all. And there's a 3-month washout period. So the control group gets no letter whatsoever. The feedback group got monthly letters October 1st, November 1st, and December 1st, telling them percentage of green items that they bought and how that did compare to others. The feedback and incentive group got those exact same letters, plus this offer of $10 to bump up a little bit their green consumption. They got a small reward for maintaining it. So this is the fundamental graphic that people saw. This is your consumption. This is the average cafeteria eater. And these are the healthiest people who are way ahead. So both the feedback and feedback plus incentive group got this. The incentive people also got this message. Turn $10, simply reach your green goal next month. For this person, it actually would have been, we had thresholds at 40% and 60%. This person still had to get to 40, so they would have gotten a very easy $10 to get to 40. The next month, they would have had to get to 60. In any event, here's what it looks like. Not a huge change, but significant. So the feedback only and the feedback and incentive groups did a little bit better in terms of green consumption. This is where the letters went out, and there's the rest of that's the washout period, so it still looks pretty good. And we see a commensurate decline in the red product consumption, also encouraging, and that largely maintained through the study. Not a huge effect, but this is an incredibly simple intervention, the letters at least. All you need is people's addresses, and of course to be able to track their numbers, but a lot of workplace cafeterias you can do that. And then it's a simple mailing. So those are the fourth and fifth. They were lumped together. We don't know they'd work separately. Oh, at least the feedback one certainly works separately. Not clear how much incentives help, but it's a very small incentive. Larger incentives may do more, but again, that gets expensive. Last one I'll show you is temptation bundling. I was not involved in this study, but it was from my colleagues Katie Milkman, Julia Minson, and Kevin Volpe at Penn. They basically get people to exercise by giving them trashy books to listen to while they're on the treadmill. That's a harsh accusation that Dan Brown and Suzanne Collins write very engaging books. Trashy is certainly too strong. We could call it light reading. So here's the full treatment. People were loaned an iPod. It had 4 of these books on it. They could only listen to it while they were exercising. There was a middle group who got the same iPods, but they were told, actually just try not to listen to this while, unless you're exercising. So the full treatment actually left them at the gym. And then a control group who just got a gift certificate. Here's the locker. They kept all the iPads in a locker at the gym. People go get them when they went. And here's what happened. In the full treatment condition, there was a significant increase in weekly gym attendance. It went up by about 56%. Not much of an effect on the intermediate group, who was only told to try not to listen to the book while you're not at the gym. So I called those books trashy. They may well be, but they're also incredibly engaging, and it seems people were listening to them away from the gym if they had that option. If you have to keep the thing at the gym, you only listen there, and then while you're there, you may as well get on the treadmill. They also asked people whether they'd be willing to pay for something like this, and this is what's encouraging, because it's just that there are people willing to pay for it. I'm out of time, so I'll just run through to the punchline there. But the average was that about 2/3 of people were willing to pay a little bit to have their iPod kept at the gym and kept away from them. And that's kind of neat. So 5 triggers that may work. We have some evidence they worked in real field settings: invitation to downsize, traffic light labels, feedback and incentives, and temptation bundling. Do they trigger free will? We suggest in some ways, yeah, they do, especially so for when the language isn't too strong. I don't think we were throwing buckets of cold water on anybody here. These were people who probably did want to eat better and exercise a little bit more. Works better then. But of course, choice was always preserved. People could still not go to the gym. There was no coercion here. And they could still get their French fries and Coca-Cola in moderation if that's what they wanted to do. In any event, thank you very much.